Have you ever studied for hours just to realize some moments later, or even worse in your exam, that you can't remember most of what you studied? This is a very common problem, but not one without a solution. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing 6 scientifically backed techniques that will help you study and remember it for as long as you want. You're welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Wells. I'm currently a third year medical student of the University of Ibadan. Before we go into the 6 techniques, I think it's very important for me to say that forgetting is a natural process, and knowing this single information changed my entire approach to studying, and it makes me much less stressed as a student. Before medical school and even my first year of university, I always feel very bad about myself anytime I realize I've forgotten again. Sometimes it makes me question myself, like, is there something actually wrong with me? But not anymore. I took my time to learn how forgetting naturally happens and how to disrupt the process of forgetting, which makes me remember any information I want to remember for as long as I want to remember it for. Our brain is naturally protecting us from information overload by refiltering and removing the information it considers not relevant for our survival and keeping the one it considers important and relevant. But also come to think of it, most of the things we are learning in school are not directly important for our survival, which is a very good reason why we forget most of these things. But there is a way we can actually make our brain mark this information as important and therefore remember this information for so long. The tips I'm going to be sharing in this video are going to be helping you to do just that. These are the 6 techniques or tips that will help you remember whatever you are studying for as long as you want to. Tip number 1 is to pay attention. There are 3 stages or types of memory. We have sensory memory, working or short-term memory, and the long-term memory. Information has to move from the sensory memory to the short-term or working memory and finally to the long-term memory, which can store limitless amount of information and can hold it for a very long time. But your sensory memory can hold information for a very short period of time, usually less than 4 seconds. And for information to move from your sensory memory to your working memory, you need to pay attention. When you are studying and you are not paying attention, in very short period of time, everything you've just read is just going to disappear, and it feels like you never even read it at all. It's a very common thing. You see students trying to read, they are reading their books and they are scrolling social media or watching TV at the same time. This is distracting you and reducing your ability to pay attention. Make sure your environment enables you to pay abrupt attention to what you are studying. Step 2 is to study actively. To remember something for long, you have to let your brain engage with that particular material very well. The more you engage with the material, the higher your likelihood of remembering the information later, and even it makes you understand this material more. So how do you actually study actively? Take pause in between your study and ask yourself, okay, what have I just read? What does this even mean? Asking yourself this kind of question will actually make you think more about what you are studying. It is very easy to read passively and just go read something without even thinking about it. But frequently asking yourself that question will make you think about the lines, the words, the letters you are reading, and it will make more sense to you, which also make you remember it for a longer period of time. Another way to study actively is by making notes from what you are studying. You see, I did not use the word copying notes because it is very easy to fall into this trap. Some people will just take their textbook and their note and just start copying the notes word for word. This might work to an extent, but generally it is going to be a waste of time and it is less effective. It is more of like a passive study. What you should do instead is read the textbook, try to understand it, and try to write what you've read in your own word. If you can write it in your own word, it means you understood what you've read. And trying to also write it in your own word will help you realize sometimes that, oh, I never understood what that meant, and will force you to go back to read that thing. All those things will help you remember information for a longer period of time. Third method is to aim to understand. Yeah, and it is no brainer that when you understand something, it becomes harder for you to forget it. And if you eventually forget something you understand, it is also very easy for you to refresh your memory of that thing compared to when you never understood it. How do you understand? But one is to give time to that thing you are trying to understand, especially if you are reading it for the first time. Another thing is to use other resources when necessary. If we are being sincere with ourselves, most of the lecture slides we get in university, they are not always very explanatory. So to understand this material, you may need to consult external resources. You could Use your lecture. Attending class could be your external resource. Using a textbook, using video, or even meeting friends to explain to you. These are external resources that can help you understand what you've learned. When you understand it, you remember this information for even longer period of time. The fourth method is to associate. What association means is linking something new you want to memorize or want to remember to something you already know, or to something you can easily remember. Let me give you an example of how I've used this thing to memorize something in the past. For example, when I was learning about the hypothalamic nucleus that produce the posterior pituitary hormones, so they told us that paraventricular nucleus produces oxytocin and supraoptic nucleus produces vasopressin. And it is very easy for me to confuse it. What I did was to learn how to associate oxytocin to paraventricular nucleus, and forever I don't think I can ever forget this. So I have a friend called Tosin, and she always para, if you know what that means. So I said oxytocin is produced by paraventricular nucleus. This is one of the several ways. Do it anyhow you like, as far as it helps you remember. And this is almost the same way mnemonic works. The fifth method is active recall and spaced repetition. It has been backed up by so many scientific evidence that active recall and spaced repetition works. But I'm not going to bore you with all those scientific jargons in this video. But let me just tell you how active recall and spaced repetition works. Let's take, for example, you are reading something for the very first time. You read it today. And one day after, you should actively try to recall this information without looking at your book. 3 days after, you should also try to recall this information. Then like 1 week after, probably 1 month after, try to recall this information. After recalling it for some number of time, the information becomes almost impossible for you to forget. But I need to say that the interval you are going to use to recall this thing is going to be depending on the kind of material you are studying and also the time you have available at hand. Active recall, which is like trying to bring out information from your brain without consulting your book, is a mentally tasking and stressful activity, and we always tend to avoid it. We always tend to avoid it for two main reasons. Number one, it is stressful. Number two, when you are trying to do active recall, you often realize that you've forgotten some part of the material, which is painful. So most people will tend to avoid to actively recall anything until their exam. But if you think well about it, you notice that even in your exam, what you are doing is recalling actively. They provide questions for you and they ask you to recall the answers to it. So my own approach, what I do is I try to recall information as many times as possible before my exam. I know if I do this enough time before my exam, to repeat recalling in my exam is not going to be difficult. And as a rule, for me, if I've not recalled something at least once, I don't believe I know it yet. And for my medical school exams, I always do this thing, especially when we're having tests. When we're having tests, 2 days to 3 days to my test, I always pace around you. That's when you will see me pacing around the house, or if I'm walking back from school. During the process of recalling these things, I will realize some part of the material that I can't remember again. Then when I get home immediately, I will check that particular part, and now that I've checked it, I know it. And surprisingly, most exams or many of the tests I've written, I always find something that I wouldn't have been able to answer if I did not use that method. An easier way to do active recall is by using past questions. Like if you're a university student and you're not doing past questions, I would say you're not making the best of the resources you have. Besides the fact that past questions are usually repeated in school, this helps you to learn the material well. And when you are trying to solve a past question, you are also trying to recall actively, which helps you remember the information for long. Just so you know, reading something once does not guarantee remembering it. For you to remember something for as long as possible, you need to revisit this thing timely at a spaced interval. And a way to revisit, the best way to revisit it is by trying to actively recall this information. So it's like the theory of use and disuse. Use it or lose it. If you don't use a particular information, your brain will think, okay, we don't need that anymore, and remove it. So if you need a particular information, you need to keep revisiting the information. The last method we are going to talk about is sleep and healthy lifestyle. Sleep particularly is very important for memory consolidation and retention. And there are a lot of research papers to prove this. As a rule for me, I always make sure I sleep every night to my exam, because I know the importance of sleep for memory retention, and consolidation. Hope you enjoyed this video and genuinely find it helpful. These are some of the things I do, and I hope they are going to help you too. So please subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friend you think might find it helpful. Peace out.